one would become an alcoholic. Anyone who stops working, gets to 11 and they have a drink, and then the next week it's 10:30, then 10, and then it's red wine on the cornflakes.
At 65, Jeremy Clarkson finally revealed what fans always suspected, and it changes everything we thought we knew about him. For decades, he was the loudest man on television, fast cars, wild jokes, and the kind of fame that made him untouchable. But behind the laughter was a man falling apart. A crumbling marriage, endless scandals, and the one secret that nearly ended it all. This isn't another Top Gear story. This is the moment Clarkson finally admits what the cameras never showed the truth about the wreck that almost destroyed his life, and how he barely survived the crash he couldn't outdrive. Before the scandals, before the headlines, Jeremy Clarkson was untouchable. He wasn't just a TV host, he was a movement. The man who took Top Gear from a quiet car show to a global storm, watched by over 350 million people a week. He made engines cool again. His sarcasm, his brutal honesty, his no-filter attitude, that was the magic formula. He turned every episode into an event and every car into a character. At home, life looked just as perfect. Clarkson lived in the English countryside with his wife, Frances Kane, his manager, his anchor, his balance. They'd built 2 decades of life together, raising 3 kids and running his growing empire. She handled the business, he handled the fame. To the world, they were the power couple behind Britain's biggest export. But fame has its own gravity. Every success pulled him further from the quiet family life he once had. Endless shoots, world tours, late-night press, runs the road never stopped, and neither did he. The same charm that made him the star of Top Gear also made him impossible to live with. Behind the laughter, there were cracks beginning to form not in the cars, but in the man driving them. Because when you live life at full throttle, it's only a matter of time before something gives out. At first, Jeremy's humor was what made him famous. He said what others were too scared to say, and that became his brand. But over time, the same attitude that built his career started to tear it apart. His quick wit turned into something sharper, something that cut a little too deep. The jokes stopped being funny to the people they landed on. It started small, a careless comment, an off-script jab, but soon the headlines were writing themselves. Every episode brought a new wave of complaints. Words that once sounded rebellious now sounded reckless. The BBC was under pressure, and Clarkson was under a microscope. He brushed it off with his usual grin, but behind that grin was exhaustion. He couldn't back down without losing the persona that made him rich, and he couldn't keep pushing without losing everything else. At home, Frances was tired of the damage control. She'd seen the toll fame was taking not just on Jeremy, but on their family. Every scandal meant more distance, more nights alone, more reminders that the man she married had become the man everyone argued about. The world still laughed at his jokes. But Frances had stopped, and what came next would turn that silence into something much louder. Rumors had followed Jeremy Clarkson for years, but this time, they weren't just gossip. During the Top Gear live tours, he grew close to his colleague Philippa Sage, and soon, the tabloids pounced. The headlines were relentless. Photos, whispers, speculation, all painting the picture of a man who couldn't separate his fame from his flaws. For Frances Kane, it wasn't just about betrayal, it was about endurance. She had stood by him through the controversies, the press storms, the endless chaos that came with being Jeremy Clarkson's wife. But this was the breaking point. After 21 years of marriage, she walked away quietly, but permanently. Friends said she'd earned every penny of the settlement. What she really earned was peace. Clarkson tried to play it off in public, cracking jokes, smiling for cameras, pretending it didn't hurt. But behind the smirk, he was unraveling. He moved out of the family home in Chipping Norton and into a London flat alone, exhausted, and surrounded by paparazzi waiting for him to slip again. For the first time, the man who could talk his way out of anything had nothing left to say. And the timing couldn't have been worse because his entire world was about to catch fire. Even after his marriage fell apart, Jeremy Clarkson didn't stop. He couldn't. Top Gear was a machine that never slowed down, and neither did the man behind it. Every week he showed up, cracking jokes, laughing with Hammond and May, pretending everything was fine. The world saw the same old Clarkson, fearless, untouchable, larger than life. But behind that grin, he was burning out. The BBC had already warned him one more misstep and it was over. The pressure was suffocating. Every word was dissected, every joke analyzed, every headline louder than the last. Off camera, he was dealing with loss no one could see. His mother had just passed away, his divorce had gone public, and the tabloids were feeding on his pain. He told friends he was exhausted, smoking too much, drinking too much, barely sleeping. The man who made millions laugh was running on fumes. But instead of stepping back, he pushed harder. Because when your identity is built on always being on, silence feels like failure. Clarkson kept filming, kept joking, kept pretending. But those close to him could see it. The cracks weren't just showing anymore, they were widening. And before long, one bad night would send everything crashing down. It was supposed to be just another filming day, long hours, cold weather, and the usual banter that came with Top Gear. But on a March evening in 2015, everything Jeremy Clarkson had built came undone over something as simple as dinner. After hours of shooting in freezing North Yorkshire, Clarkson returned to his hotel exhausted and hungry. He expected the steak dinner he'd asked for comfort after another grueling day. But when he found out the kitchen was closed and no hot food had been prepared, something inside him finally snapped. Years of pressure, grief, divorce, and burnout erupted in 30 seconds of rage. Witnesses said it was like watching a storm hit without warning. Words turned into shouting. Shouting turned into a punch, a moment of blind anger that would change everything. The producer, Oisin Tymon, walked away bruised, humiliated, and stunned. The man who could charm millions with his words had just crossed a line that no apology could fix. The story spread like wildfire. Clarkson Punch's producer was everywhere. Fans rushed to defend him. Petitions poured in by the hundreds of thousands. But deep down, even Clarkson knew this time was different. The BBC launched an investigation, and within weeks, the verdict was final. Jeremy Clarkson, the face of Top Gear, the man who made car culture cool again, was out, fired, gone. 27 years of television history ended over a single stake. For a man who lived his life at full throttle, this was the crash that left nothing but smoke. When the cameras stopped, the silence was deafening. For the first time in decades, Jeremy Clarkson had nowhere to go, no set to walk onto, no script to hide behind, no crowd to make laugh. Just the echo of his own mistakes. In the span of 12 months, he'd lost everything that once defined him, his mother, his marriage, and now his career. The man who once mocked failure was suddenly living it. Paparazzi camped outside his flat in London, waiting for a glimpse of the fallen giant. Photos of him walking alone in rumpled clothes filled the tabloids a broken man, his trademark smirk replaced by something far heavier. He didn't fight the narrative this time. No sarcastic jabs, no witty comebacks, just quiet acceptance. It was my own silly fault, he admitted, sounding more human than he ever had on screen. The bravado was gone. The laughter, too. For the first time, Jeremy Clarkson sounded small. Even his closest friends said he looked lost. Andy Willman, his longtime producer, recalled how Clarkson spent weeks barely speaking, weighed down by guilt and uncertainty. The man who once ruled British television was now just a headline, a cautionary tale of what happens when fame burns too hot for too long. He didn't know it yet, but this wasn't the end of the road. It was the wreck before the rebuild. In the months after his firing, Jeremy Clarkson faded into the background, a strange sight for a man who once lived under constant spotlight. For the first time, there were no engines roaring, no applause, no cameras, just silence. And in that silence, he started to feel the weight of everything he'd lost. He'd been Top Gear. It wasn't just a job, it was his identity, his empire, his rhythm. Without it, he was adrift. The man who spent decades racing the world now sat still, watching his legacy move on without him. BBC carried on the show with new faces, new voices, but none of them were him. And Clarkson knew it. He changed his Twitter bio to a single line, "I used to be a presenter on the BBC 2 motoring show Top Gear." For millions of fans, it was shocking. For him, it was heartbreak. Years of dominance reduced to one sentence. Behind closed doors, Clarkson was grieving not just the show, but the version of himself that show made possible. The loud, confident, indestructible Clarkson was gone. What remained was a man who finally understood what it meant to fall. But while he was mourning, the world was already moving. Offers started coming in from networks, streaming platforms, executives who saw the scandal not as a curse, but as an opportunity. And for the first time in a long time, Clarkson had a choice to make: fade away quietly or rebuild louder than ever. And we all know what he chose. Jeremy Clarkson doesn't disappear quietly. Just when it looked like his story had ended, he came roaring back. Not with an apology tour, but with something much bigger, a resurrection. By mid-2015, whispers began to spread through the industry. Amazon had made an offer, a new show, full creative freedom, and an eye-watering budget. No censors, no BBC limits, no one to tell Clarkson how to behave. It was everything he'd ever wanted. Alongside Richard Hammond and James May, the trio reunited under a new banner, the Grand Tour. It wasn't just a comeback, it was a statement, a middle finger to the system that had cast him out. When the deal was announced, Clarkson walked into the press event with his old smirk back in place, confident, witty, almost relieved. "I feel like I've climbed out of a biplane and into a spaceship," he joked. For the first time in years, he looked alive again. The man who'd been written off by the media was now leading one of the biggest streaming projects ever made, a reported $250 million deal. When the Grand Tour premiered in late 2016, the world tuned in. Millions watched as the three friends returned to what they did best: driving, laughing, and breaking the rules. It was classic Clarkson, bold, loud, and unapologetic. But beneath the humor, there was something different. He seemed calmer, like a man who had already faced his worst day and survived it. This time, he wasn't trying to prove he was invincible. He just wanted to drive again, and in that simplicity, he found purpose. Clarkson had done the impossible. He turned a public downfall into a career rebirth. But the next transformation wouldn't come on the track, it would come on the farm. In 2021, the world saw a different Jeremy Clarkson, not the loudmouth behind the wheel, but a man standing in muddy boots on a windswept field, trying to grow barley. Clarkson's farm was supposed to be a vanity project, another laugh for fans who loved watching him struggle with something new. But it became something no one expected, the most honest version of Jeremy Clarkson ever put on camera. Gone were the studio lights and supercars. Instead, there were tractors, sheep, and unpredictable English weather. Every mistake was real, every frustration, every triumph, unscripted. And for once, Clarkson wasn't the man shouting orders, he was the one learning, failing, and getting back up. Viewers didn't just see a celebrity playing farmer, they saw a man humbled by nature and circumstance. There was one moment that changed everything, a scene where Clarkson had to put down one of his sheep, and the man who once punched a producer over a steak broke down in tears. The world saw something it never thought possible: genuine heartbreak. It wasn't an act, it wasn't for ratings, it was real pain from a man who had spent his entire career hiding behind sarcasm. Critics called it the best work of his life. Fans who once loved him for his arrogance now loved him for his vulnerability. Clarkson's farm wasn't about cars or fame, it was about transformation. It showed that even the most stubborn men can change when life strips everything else away. For the first time, Jeremy Clarkson wasn't trying to be the loudest man in the room. He was just trying to be a better one. And in that quiet, muddy corner of Oxfordshire, he finally found something Top Gear never gave him: peace. Today, at 65, Jeremy Clarkson seems like a man who finally eased off the throttle. The noise, the headlines, the chaos, all of it has faded into the background. In their place is something he spent most of his life running from: calm. He still stirs controversy now and then, it's in his DNA, but there's a noticeable shift. The anger is softer, the laughter more genuine. He lives with his partner, Lisa Hogan, on the same Oxfordshire farm that once humbled him. You can see it in his interviews now: less ego, more gratitude. He's still blunt, still Clarkson, but he carries his words like a man who knows how easily everything can vanish. When asked about happiness, he doesn't talk about cars, money, or fame anymore. He talks about the land, about feeding sheep, watching the seasons change, and sitting outside as the sun sets. "I've never been happier," he once said, and for once, everyone believed him. The man who wants to find chaos now finds peace in the simple rhythm of life. No cameras, no producers, no pretending, just the quiet hum of the countryside and the echo of a life rebuilt. He'll always be the man who made engines roar, but his greatest victory wasn't on the road. It was surviving the wreckage and finding something worth slowing down for. In the end, Jeremy Clarkson's story was never just about cars. It was about speed, pride, loss, and the long road back from his own mistakes. He was the man who mocked weakness, who hid behind humor, who lived faster than anyone else dared. But even he couldn't outdrive everything. The fame, the scandals, the heartbreak they caught up, and when they did, they stripped him down to something raw, something real. What's left now isn't the loudest man on television. It's someone quieter, wiser, a man who found peace not on a racetrack, but on a farm far from the cameras that once defined him. Clarkson didn't just rebuild his career, he rebuilt himself. And maybe that's the real story, not how he fell, but how he finally stood still long enough to see what mattered. Because at 65, Jeremy Clarkson has proved one thing: you can lose the fame, the fortune, and even the show that made you a legend, but if you survive the crash, you get to write the next chapter. And somehow, the man who outdrove everyone else finally outdrove his past.